Hola, hermana. It's nice to meet you again if I'm seeing you again. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. It depends where you're at in life. Today, if you've watched these before, basically, I'm Victor. I like to sometimes have little discussion videos or like little videos on the subject of faith. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's a pretty well known parable. But I wanted to talk about a different dimension of it, actually, that I don't think is always covered elsewhere. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with it, basically the parable of the Good Samaritan relays the story of a man who was attacked by bandits in the wilderness one day and left for dead. Over the course of the parable, three or four characters come across his body. None of them help him until the very last one, which is the Good Samaritan. To this day, the term Samaritan is actually now used by a whole charity organization, and so it has positive connotations. But back in those days, if you've been at church, they probably told you that Samaritans were looked on negatively by the Jewish people. And so the context of this parable being that Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" when he was teaching that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is a command in the Old Testament. Jesus sort of illustrates the idea of loving your neighbor using a character who was maligned, while simultaneously maligning or showcasing the lack of loving your neighbor within characters that were esteemed back in those days, such as I think one of them was a priest. I can't quite remember the other characters, but yeah, that's the gist of basically what happens. Anyways, the dimension I'm really interested in today is a particular character of the Levite priest. Now, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, which I'm presuming you're not, but some people are, but like if you're familiar with the Old Testament, the Levitical priesthood were not permitted to touch a dead body, right? And this invites like a motivation for the character of the Levite priest as to why he wouldn't want to get involved with the man who was on the road in the first place. Basically, since God himself had stated, "Don't touch a dead body," he was trying to obey or abide those scriptures. And yet he's not commended for the action, right? So what this invites is a kind of new dimension to the story, because you sort of see that it's not just an emphasis on the value of loving your neighbor, but it's also an emphasis on another thing Jesus said, which is that the love of God, I think, love your God with all your mind and all your heart and all your soul, I think, and all your strength. And to love your neighbors, you love yourself. These are the two foundations of all the other laws. Sorry, my mom's coming up, so I've got to give her a little bit of space. Hola, Mom.
Aren't you recording?
Yeah, I am recording, but gotta give you away.
Why don't you? Are you still recording?
Yeah. So, anyway, where were we? So yeah, love you. These two commands are the foundation of all the other laws. And so what you basically get once you consider the Levite's position is that it would have been better for him to break like a small rule, a ritualistic rule, you know what I mean? It's not necessarily what would happen if you touched a dead body and you were a priest, which was expected to happen eventually, because you can't always control corpses that are around you, was that you would become ceremonial unclean. And I'm not sure if this would really count for the Levites. I don't know, so I'm not going to even bring it up. I was going to talk a little bit about Nazirite vows, which have a similar rule. But whatever. You weren't allowed to touch a dead body. But it would have been better for him to at least check on this guy, because he didn't know if he was dead or not, right? That risk would have been better for him than for him to ignore the person entirely and not be a neighbor. So I guess you could say what God shows us is that blind adherence or pedantry towards like the letter of the law is not really as valuable as genuine application of the heart of the law, which is love. Once their actions are no longer in service of the point of the laws that you're obeying, you're not really obeying them quite well or quite right. You get what I'm saying? I think it's a pretty simple point, but it's also a really valuable one. And so in philosophy, for example, we don't worry, I'm about to wrap up. But it's interesting because in philosophy you do get this dilemma of, if the Nazis knock on your door and you're hiding some Jews, do you tell them the truth or do you lie to them, right? Because obviously lying is supposed to be wrong. I think Kant argued, the philosopher, that if you believe lying is wrong, then you should consistently act accordingly, no matter the situation. I disagree with this sentiment. Even in the Bible, there's actually a passage about a man who was hiding the prophets who were being persecuted by a tyrannical king at some point, and he is not condemned for lying to the king, basically, in order to protect these people. And so I think context really does make a difference. Now, I don't think the ends justify the means. I don't think, therefore, whenever you feel like lying is a good idea, or, well, I think I'm loving somebody by telling them this lie specifically, I think those are mostly just excuses we make to ease our own consciences. So I wouldn't go haywire with it. I think, generally speaking, a rule is there for a reason. There aren't a lot of situations where I'm going to be able to justify just casually killing somebody, right? But at the same time, I want my obedience or my observation of what's right to be in line with the purpose of actually doing right. Doesn't mean that I can do evil in order to accomplish good, but it does mean that 100% I don't consider it wrong to lie to those Nazis. Anyway, hope this was an interesting video. If you'd like, you can open up a discussion on it in the comments if anybody has anything else to say or to add. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.